June 15, 1944. The Philippine Sea. At 30,000 feet, the sky is a crystalline vault of blue, but for Ensign Saburo Katsura, the world is narrowing into a suffocating cockpit of vibrating metal and the smell of high-octane fuel. Below, the Pacific Ocean stretches out as an infinite, unforgiving slab of obsidian, broken only by the white wakes of the Imperial Japanese Navy's pride, the carriers Taiho and Shokaku. This is the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a moment in history where the destiny of two empires is being decided in the span of a single afternoon. Saburo's Mitsubishi A6M50, once the undisputed master of these skies, feels suddenly fragile, a relic of a bygone era. The air around him is thick with the dark smudges of American anti-aircraft fire and the predatory shadows of Grumman Hellcats. The transition from combat to catastrophe occurs in a heartbeat. A sudden, jarring impact shudders through the Zero's airframe. The instrument panel, a collection of glass and radium-painted needles, shatters into 1,000 jagged diamonds. There is no sound of an explosion, only the terrifying, rhythmic thrum of fire licking at the fuel lines beneath the pilot's seat. Smoke, thick and oily, begins to fill the canopy, tasting of burnt rubber and impending death. Saburo pulls back on the stick, but the cables have gone limp, severed by a burst of .50 caliber rounds. The aircraft rolls sluggishly to the left, the horizon tilting until the sky and sea swap places. For a Japanese pilot in 1944, the cockpit was not merely a workspace, it was a spiritual vessel. There was a prevailing philosophy within the Imperial Japanese Navy that the pilot and the machine were a single, indivisible entity. To survive the destruction of the aircraft was often seen as a failure of resolve, a breach of the unspoken contract between the warrior and his emperor. Most Zeros were not equipped with self-sealing fuel tanks to save weight and maximize maneuverability, making them flying tinderboxes. Even more telling was the cultural stigma surrounding parachutes. Many pilots flew without them, or if they had them, they were used as seat cushions rather than life-saving devices. The expectation was clear: one does not return from a lost battle. As the Zero plunges toward the water, the G-forces pin Saburo against the metal bulkhead. He watches the altimeter needle spin wildly toward Zero. The scream of the wind through the bullet holes in the fuselage rises to a banshee wail. In those final seconds of flight, the training of the Kasumigaura Flight Reserve takes over. He isn't thinking of glory or the Yasukuni Shrine. He is struggling with the primal, human urge to breathe. The impact is a wall of concrete. The Zero strikes the water at a steep angle, the engine block shearing off and dragging the nose into the depths. The canopy glass implodes, and the cold, salt-laden embrace of the Pacific rushes in to claim the cockpit. In the sudden underwater silence, Saburo fumbles with his harness, his lungs burning, as the silver light of the surface begins to fade above him. Darkness threatens to pull him down into the abyss, a silent witness to the end of a warrior's journey. The transition from the violent, screaming chaos of a crashing aircraft to the absolute stillness of the open ocean is a shock to the human nervous system. Saburo breaks the surface, gasping, his uniform heavy and sodden with the brine of the Philippine Sea. Around him, the debris of his Zero, scraps of aluminum and drops of iridescent oil, floats briefly before being swallowed by the swells. He is alone. In the distance, the muffled thumps of anti-aircraft fire and the faint drone of distant engines serve as the only reminders that a world-altering struggle is occurring just over the horizon. For the Japanese airmen, this isolation was not merely a physical state, it was a profound spiritual crisis. The cultural framework of the Imperial Japanese military was built upon the bedrock of Bushido, a code of ethics that prioritized the collective over the individual and death over dishonor. For a pilot like Saburo, the expectation of his superiors and his society was absolute. He was to be a human bullet. This ideology was reflected in the very design of his equipment. While American pilots were increasingly seen as high-value assets whose experience was irreplaceable, the Japanese High Command often viewed their airmen as consumable components of a weapons system. This cold calculus meant that survival gear was treated as an afterthought, an unnecessary weight that hindered the performance of the aircraft and the resolve of the man. To be a downed pilot in the Imperial Navy was to be a ghost waiting for the body to catch up. The meager survival kit provided to Saburo consisted of little more than a small, handheld compass, a flask of water, and a ceremonial senenbari, a 1,000-stitch belt, meant to provide spiritual protection. There was no inflatable raft, no radio, and no signaling device beyond a small signal mirror that required perfect conditions to function. The logic was grimly simple. If you were shot down over the vast Pacific, the Emperor's light would guide you to the next life, not back to the carrier deck. This was the Bushido expectation, a serene acceptance of annihilation that viewed rescue as a form of spiritual weakness. Saburo floats in his life vest, his legs kicking rhythmically to keep his head above the rhythmic crests. He stares at the sun, calculating his remaining hours of consciousness. He expects the cold, he expects the thirst, and he expects the sharks. He has been trained to meet these ends with a stoic silence, perhaps composing a final death poem in his mind to honor his family in Shizuoka. He is prepared for the void. What he is not prepared for is the sight of something bright and artificial bobbing in the trough of a wave several hundred meters to his east. It is a splash of neon yellow, a color that does not exist in the natural palette of the ocean or the muted tones of the Japanese arsenal. It is the first hint of a reality that contradicts everything he has been told about the nature of the enemy and the value of a single human life. The yellow object rises and falls with the rhythm of the tide, a jarring anomaly against the deep indigo of the Pacific. Saburo swims toward it, his movements heavy and uncoordinated. As he draws closer, the silhouette clarifies. It is not a fragment of a ship or a floating sea creature, but a fully deployed multi-man life raft. It is tethered to a larger mass beneath the water, the submerged remains of a Grumman Hellcat, the very predator that had likely swarmed the skies over the task force only hours before. The American pilot is nowhere to be seen, likely claimed by the impact or the depths, but his vessel of survival remains, bobbing defiantly on the surface like a beacon from another world. For Saburo, the raft is a terrifying optical illusion. In the Imperial Japanese Navy, such a device was a mythic luxury. The Japanese military doctrine focused almost exclusively on the offensive capabilities of the aircraft, stripping away frivolous weight to ensure the Zero could turn tighter and fly further. To see a raft of such sturdy construction, made of thick, reinforced rubber and painted in a high-visibility hue, was to witness a fundamental difference in national priority. He pulls himself toward the edge, his fingers gripping the cold, slick material. It feels solid, engineered with a level of industrial confidence that stuns him. With a final agonizing surge of strength, he rolls over the side and collapses onto the inflated floor. The raft is a floating sanctuary. It is dry, stable, and remarkably spacious. Saburo lies on his back, staring up at the same sun that had nearly blinded him in the cockpit, but the context has shifted. He is no longer a drowning man awaiting the inevitable. He is a guest in an enemy's house. He looks around the small craft and notices a series of stenciled markings in English. Though he cannot read the words, the precision of the manufacturing speaks a language of its own. It is the language of a nation that does not expect its warriors to die simply because their machines have failed. This yellow mirage is a physical manifestation of American logistics, a system designed to snatch a man back from the gates of the underworld. The contrast is visceral. Saburo thinks of his comrades who had vanished beneath the waves during the Solomons campaign, men who had nothing but their own lungs and a desperate prayer to the spirits of their ancestors. He had been taught that the Americans were soft, pampered by materialism and lacking the spiritual steel required for a long war. Yet, as he touches the buoyant tubes of the raft, he realizes that this softness has a terrifying weight. The enemy has not just sent a pilot into battle. They have sent a comprehensive survival system. Tucked into the corners of the raft are various pouches and containers, secured with heavy-duty zippers and waterproof seals. Among these items lies a small, rectangular object that catches the light, a silver ration tin. It is the first piece of a puzzle that will eventually dismantle Saburo's entire understanding of the war he is fighting. Saburo's hand trembles as he reaches for the heavy canvas satchel secured to the floor of the raft. The material is thick, treated with a waxy substance to repel the corrosive salt of the ocean. In the Japanese military, equipment was often fragile, designed for a single use or a short life of desperate service. This American kit, however, feels permanent. It carries an aura of industrial immortality, as if it were forged in a factory that never slept and never lacked for steel or rubber. To Saburo, who had grown accustomed to the fraying edges of Japan's shrinking resources, the mere existence of such a robust survival pack is a form of psychological warfare. It is a physical manifestation of a nation that does not just participate in war, but dominates it through the sheer volume of its preparation. His fingers find a heavy-duty zipper, a mechanism far more sophisticated than the simple buttons or ties used on Japanese flight gear. As he pulls it back, the sound is sharp and metallic, cutting through the rhythmic slosh of the waves. He expects to find perhaps a flare or a basic medical dressing. Instead, he is confronted with a meticulously organized treasure trove of technology. He pulls out a small, heavy rectangular object wrapped in a protective, silver-colored foil. He turns it over in his hands, marveling at the lack of rust or wear. This is the silver ration tin, a cornerstone of American survival logistics. It is not just food. It is a compact, engineered promise of life, sealed in a metal that Japan now struggles to find even for its frontline aircraft. Saburo's initial reaction is one of intense suspicion. In the propaganda films shown at the bases in Kyushu and Truk, Americans were depicted as cowardly and treacherous. He wonders if the contents are poisoned, a final trap left by a retreating enemy to ensure that even in survival, a Japanese warrior would find only death. He remembers stories of booby-trapped items found on the islands of the South Pacific. But as he looks at the tin, he sees the clean, stamped letters of the American manufacturing process. There is no malice in this object, only a staggering amount of care. It is a product of a society that values the biological needs of its citizens with a precision that borders on the religious. He continues to dig through the kit, his eyes widening with every discovery. He finds a small, hand-pumped desalinization kit, a signaling mirror with a sighting hole that allows for pinpoint accuracy, and a packet of green powder labeled as shark repellent. Each item represents a specific hazard of the sea that the American designers had anticipated and solved. In the Japanese Navy, the solution to a shark or to thirst was spiritual fortitude, the ability to suffer without complaint until the end. Here, in this yellow raft, the solution is engineering. Saburo realizes that he is not just looking at a survival kit, he is looking at the industrial output of a continent. The kit is a message. We have thought of everything, so that you may live. This realization begins to gnaw at his resolve more effectively than the hunger or the cold ever could. He sits in the center of the raft, surrounded by these alien miracles, a soldier of a dying empire holding the silver evidence of a rising one. The silver ration tin sits in the center of Saburo's palm, a miracle of metallurgy in a world of deprivation. Using the small key attached to the side, he begins to peel back the lid. The metal curls away with a satisfying rhythmic hiss, the sound of a perfect vacuum seal being broken. Inside, he does not find the meager, gritty rice balls or the dried fish that constitute the ration of a Japanese soldier. Instead, he finds a dense, dark block of deration chocolate, fortified with oat flour and designed to withstand the tropical heat without melting. Beside it are wax-sealed packets of biscuits, a small tin of jam, and several envelopes of powdered synthetic fruit juice. The aroma that rises from the tin is overwhelming. To a man who has lived on the edge of starvation for months, the smell of cocoa and refined sugar is almost hallucinogenic. In the Japanese military, the spiritual power of the soldier was expected to replace physical nourishment. Pilots were often told that their hunger was merely a lack of discipline, a failing of the spirit. Yet, here in this American tin, there is no appeal to the spirit. There is only a massive, scientific injection of calories. Saburo breaks off a piece of the chocolate. It is hard and bitter, designed to be nibbled slowly, but as it melts on his tongue, he feels a surge of energy that is almost violent in its intensity. This is the silver tin, a recurring symbol of an abundance so vast that it can afford to gift its soldiers the taste of home even in the middle of a desolate ocean. As he eats, he discovers a small, waterproof packet of cigarettes, Lucky Strikes, and a book of matches. He stares at them in disbelief. In Japan, tobacco was a luxury, often used as a reward for suicide missions or reserved for high-ranking officers. Here, it is included as a standard item in an emergency kit, tucked away in a rubber boat as if the comfort of a smoke were as vital as water or air. This is the realization that begins to rot the pillars of Saburo's ideology. He had been taught that the Americans were a decadent people whose reliance on luxury would lead to their downfall. But as the sugar hits his bloodstream and the nicotine calms his nerves, he realizes that this luxury is not a weakness. It is a weapon. The silver tin represents a logistical philosophy that is entirely alien to the Axis powers. For the Americans, the individual pilot is not a consumable part, but a massive investment of time, money, and training. To lose a pilot is to lose months of instruction and thousands of dollars. Therefore, no expense is spared to bring him back. Saburo looks at the empty tin, its reflective surface gleaming like a mirror. He sees his own haggard reflection and compares it to the pristine quality of the items he has just consumed. He realizes that he is not fighting a group of men. He is fighting a factory. He is fighting a nation that has so much steel, so much sugar, and so much concern for its people that it can package a small piece of civilization into a silver box and drop it into the sea, just in case one of its sons might need it. Having consumed the contents of the silver tin, Saburo turns his attention to the mechanical contents of the survival kit. He pulls out an object that looks like a small, heavy book but is actually a complex signaling device. It is a heliograph mirror made of high-grade, non-corrosive alloy, featuring a precision-drilled sighting hole in the center. He holds it up to the sun, watching the beam of light dance across the swells. In his training, a pilot was expected to simply endure until death or a miracle occurred. There was no systematic method provided for actively seeking rescue from the surface of the sea. Here, the American pilot was provided with a tool that allowed him to project his presence for dozens of miles. It was not just a mirror, it was a voice. Next, he discovers the chemical packets. One is a bright green dye marker that, when tossed into the water, creates a massive luminescent stain visible from 10,000 feet. Another is a packet of shark repellent, a chemical compound developed by American universities specifically to protect their downed aviators. Saburo stares at these items with a mixture of awe and resentment. To the Japanese military mind, the ocean was a testing ground for the spirit, where the brave were separated from the weak by their ability to withstand the elements. The American approach was to treat the ocean as a technical problem to be solved with chemistry and physics. These tools were the tools of a different god, the god of rationalism and mass production. The most shocking discovery is a small, hand-operated desalinization kit. In Japanese survival training, if a man ran out of water, he was told to drink the blood of a bird or simply accept his fate as a sacrifice to the sea. The idea that a pilot could carry a portable factory capable of turning salt water into life-sustaining fresh water was beyond Saburo's comprehension. He pumps the handle experimentally, watching as a few drops of clear liquid emerge from the tube. This was the ultimate contrast. A Japanese pilot carried a dagger to take his own life to preserve his honor, while an American pilot carried a machine to preserve his life against the very laws of nature. These objects represent more than just survival. They represent a society that views its citizens as precious capital. Saburo realizes that the American pilot was not expected to be a hero through suffering, but to be an asset that must be recovered, repaired, and returned to the fight. Every item in the kit, the mirror, the dye, the repellent, the pump, was a link in a chain of rescue that stretched all the way back to the sprawling industrial complexes of Detroit and Pittsburgh. Sitting in the yellow raft, Saburo feels the weight of his own insignificance. He had been taught that his life belonged to the Emperor, but he sees now that the Emperor had not provided him with a way to keep it. The American pilot's life belonged to a nation that had invested its entire scientific and industrial soul into ensuring he came home. This realization is a wound deeper than any inflicted by the Hellcat's guns. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and deep oranges, Saburo finds himself drifting in a state of cognitive dissonance. The physical comfort of the raft is undeniable, but it is the data of disparity that haunts his thoughts. He begins to perform the grim mental arithmetic of a losing war. In Japan, the production of a single aircraft carrier like the Taiho required the total economic mobilization of entire prefectures. The loss of its air group was a national catastrophe that could not be repaired. Yet here, bobbing in the water, is evidence of a nation that views the loss of a multi-million-yen fighter plane as an acceptable cost, provided the pilot is preserved. The historical reality of 1944 was a study in staggering industrial imbalance. By this stage of the conflict, the United States was launching a new Essex-class fleet carrier every few months, while Japan struggled to finish even one. More importantly, the American total war effort had perfected the art of the life cycle. For every pilot sent into the cockpit, there was a multi-layered safety net. The air-sea rescue units, the Dumbo PBY Catalinus, and the submarines specifically assigned to lifeguard duty near enemy coastlines. The kit in Saburo's hands is a microcosm of this macroeconomic reality. It is estimated that the U.S. government spent over $25,000, a fortune in 1944, on the training and equipment of a single naval aviator. The contents of the yellow raft are the final, most expensive installment of that investment. Saburo reflects on his own training at Chuchiura. He was taught that the American sailor was a merchant at heart, motivated only by profit and terrified of physical hardship. He was told that the Japanese spirit, tempered by centuries of tradition and the Yamato Damashii, would always triumph over the material superiority of the West. But as he looks at the rubberized floor of the raft, he realizes that the Americans have used their material superiority to create a new kind of spirit, one based on the unbreakable bond between a state and its individual defenders. The American pilot fought with the confidence of a man who knew his country would come looking for him. Saburo, by contrast, fought with the lonely desperation of a man who knew he was already dead. This is the contrast of value that defined the Pacific War. One side saw its men as arrows to be fired and forgotten. The other saw its men as the very soul of the machine. The sheer volume of American production meant that they could afford to be humane. They could afford to build rafts that lasted weeks, tins that stayed fresh for years, and mirrors that could signal across the curvature of the earth. For Japan, humanity had become a luxury it could no longer provide. The silver tin was not just a container of chocolate. It was a silver bullet fired from the heart of American industry, striking at the very core of the Japanese warrior's identity. In the silence of the evening swells, Saburo realizes that no amount of spiritual fervor can bridge the gap between a nation that saves its sons and a nation that spends them. As the silver light of the moon begins to dance upon the crests of the waves, Saburo feels a strange, warm pulsing in his extremities. The sugar from the D-ration chocolate and the vitamins from the powder juice have entered his bloodstream, performing a biological rescue that his own military leadership would have deemed impossible. This is the weight of democracy, a tangible, caloric force that restores the body while simultaneously eroding the ideology of sacrifice. In the rigid hierarchy of the Imperial Japanese Navy, physical discomfort was a virtue, a way to sharpen the spirit against the softness of the material world. But as the warmth spreads through his shivering frame, Saburo begins to understand that a well-fed soldier is not a soft one. He is a formidable one. The calories in the silver tin are more than just sustenance. They are a declaration of a political and social philosophy. Democracy, in this yellow raft, is not an abstract concept or a political slogan. It is the presence of chocolate, clean water, and medicine where none should logically exist. It is the refusal of a nation to let its citizens suffer needlessly. For the first time in his life, Saburo contemplates the possibility that the Americans are not fighting for greed or land, but for this very sense of individual dignity. The abundance he is consuming is the byproduct of a system that rewards innovation and values the life of the common man. Each bite of the enriched biscuit is a silent argument against the total submission required by the emperor. He looks at the empty wrappers and the discarded tin. To a Japanese officer, this waste would be scandalous, a sign of a people who do not know the value of things because they have too much. But to Saburo, the survivor, it is a revelation. The Americans have too much because they have organized their entire society around the idea that too much is exactly what is required to protect their freedom. The weight of this realization is heavier than the gear itself. He had been taught that the West was a decaying mansion, beautiful on the outside but rotten with individualism. Sitting in the dark, his strength returning, he sees that the house of democracy is actually a fortress built of high-calorie chocolate and vulcanized rubber. The transformation within his mind is now complete. The spiritual steel he was supposed to possess has been softened by the very real, very effective care of his enemy. He realizes that the war is already over, not because of the bombs or the carriers, but because of the spirit contained within the silver tin. A nation that treats a downed pilot with such meticulous concern cannot be defeated by a nation that treats its pilots as expendable fuel. As he drifts through the night, the recurring symbol of American abundance, the silver metal and the sweet taste of cocoa, remains his only companion. He is no longer a warrior of the rising sun. He is a man kept alive by the light of a different ideology, waiting for the dawn to see what kind of world that light will reveal. Dawn breaks over the Philippine Sea with a clarity that feels like a judgment. The horizon is a sharp line of gold and fire, and in that light a distant rhythmic hum begins to vibrate through the air. It is not the high-pitched scream of a fighter, but the deep, guttural drone of a PBY Catalina, the Dumbo flying boat specifically tasked with scouring the waste for the survivors of the previous day's carnage. Saburo watches as the massive high-wing silhouette grows larger, its landing floats retracting as it banks toward the yellow raft. This is the moment of the final reckoning. In the Japanese military code of the 1940s, capture was the ultimate disgrace, a stain that extended beyond the individual to their family and ancestors. Saburo's training had been explicit. If rescue is impossible, one must take their own life. If rescue comes from the enemy, one must resist until the end. His hand instinctively moves toward the small ceremonial dagger tucked into his flight suit, the only survival tool his own nation had seen fit to provide him. He looks at the blade, then looks at the empty silver ration tin and the life-giving technology surrounding him. The dagger represents a culture of death. The raft represents a culture of life. For the first time, the choice is not between honor and dishonor, but between a lie and a truth. The Catalina circles once, dropping a smoke marker that flares orange against the blue water. As the plane touches down, skipped across the swells with practiced ease, Saburo feels a strange sense of relief. He realizes that he cannot strike at the men who built this raft. To do so would be to deny the humanity they had extended to him through their logistics. The American crew members appear at the waist blister of the aircraft, their faces not filled with the hatred he had been taught to expect, but with a weary, professional concern. They throw a line, the rope splashing near the raft. Saburo does not reach for his knife. Instead, he reaches for the rope, his fingers closing around the hemp with the same desperation he had felt when gripping the silver tin. As he is pulled toward the open hatch of the aircraft, Saburo experiences the final stage of his transformation. He is being captured by mercy, a concept that exists nowhere in the manual of the Imperial Navy. He is hauled aboard by strong, well-fed hands, and immediately wrapped in a thick wool blanket. One of the Americans offers him a canteen of fresh water and a cigarette, unaware that they are confirming the silent collapse of Saburo's entire world. He sits on the metal floor of the fuselage, surrounded by more crates, more tins, and more evidence of a nation that has mastered the art of the possible. He is a prisoner, yes, but he is a living one, saved by the very softness he was told would be the enemy's undoing. He watches the yellow raft drift away, a lonely dot of defiance against the sea, knowing that his war has ended not with a shout of glory, but with the quiet, silver taste of survival. 40 years after the smoke cleared from the Philippine Sea, Saburo Katsura sits in his quiet home in Shizuoka, the scent of green tea replacing the memory of high-octane fuel. On his desk, a small, dented piece of silver metal serves as a paperweight. It is a relic of the silver ration tin, the only item he managed to keep from the day his world was dismantled and rebuilt. To his grandchildren, he is a retired businessman, a man of few words and gentle habits. They know he was a pilot, but they cannot comprehend the distance he traveled between the cockpit of his Falling Zero and the floor of that yellow raft. He looks at the tin and sees not just a container of food, but a beacon of a larger truth that the world has since come to accept as the foundation of modern peace. The war had been a struggle of ideologies, but on the surface of the Pacific, it was a struggle of logistics. Saburo realized then what history has confirmed, that the strength of a nation is measured not by the number of men it is willing to kill, but by the number of its own it is willing to save. The American abundance was never just about greed or material wealth. It was about the logistical manifestation of a belief in the inherent value of the individual. The silver tin, the desalinizer, and the yellow raft were the tools of a society that understood that freedom is maintained through the care of its defenders. By treating their pilots as irreplaceable, the Americans created a spirit that was more resilient than any culture of mandatory sacrifice could ever hope to be. The legacy of that encounter in the raft is the world Saburo helped build after the surrender, a Japan that moved away from the austerity of the sword and toward the prosperity of the factory. He understood that the abundance he once feared as a weakness was actually the ultimate strength of a free people. The larger truth is that ideology is hollow if it does not feed the hungry or protect the fallen. As he watches the sun set over the Pacific once more, he feels no shame in his survival. He was not defeated by a more powerful weapon. He was liberated by a more powerful idea. The silver metal on his desk catches the light, reflecting a century of peace. It stands as a poetic reminder that the ultimate victory in human conflict does not belong to the most ruthless, but to those who value life enough to package a piece of home into a small, silver box and send it across the world to a son in need. In the end, the war was won by the culture of the silver tin, proving forever that the most profound expression of power is the capacity for mercy and the provision of abundance. The ocean is quiet now, its depths holding the bones of machines, but the spirit of that rescue remains the defining light of the modern age. You are a professional cinematic historian and long-form scriptwriter specializing in WW2 documentary narration. Your task is to expand the following title into a full historical cinematic script following the exact style of the WW2 Tales competitor channel.